organizations kind of need to understand that people want to follow and engage with humans. The organization hasn't yet either adopted a tool or a framework to which to launch an advocacy or social selling play within their organization. I definitely urge them to look into some resources around that. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Beyond Social podcast, a show where we take you behind the scenes on how we're building an awesome tool for marketers. I'm Reggie, one of your hosts, and today Vitaly and I are talking about employee advocacy, social selling. What are the differences? How are they the same? We're excited to dive in today, Vitaly. I know that we just released an employee advocacy tool within Vistasocial, a platform to help companies to just really get their message out there through their employees, really get better reach, increased reach through different channels. Social selling, something that's kind of come up recently. Let's talk about the differences maybe. How do we define it?
Sure, or perhaps the lack of the differences. So I think the employee advocacy is an immensely important strategy that is oftentimes overlooked by companies, and mostly due to this intricate and delicate relationships that companies have with their employees, whereby perhaps it's not as common or it's not as maybe straightforward as it is to ask an employee to share a company's message and get them involved. And I think in one of the episodes we talked about how corporate, companies' culture would need to make way or would need to get adjusted or, set up in a way where employees actually want to do this, because the last thing you kind of want with advocacy programs is to force it upon people to disseminate your message. But once it is rolling, once essentially your employees are sharing your message, the goal is indeed to reach their networks, and which essentially are the types of audiences that you may not otherwise reach with your standard marketing. And that goes essentially, and that amplifies your message effectively, right? So you are posting to social and your employees then amplify your message through resharing, through liking, through commenting. All of that is part of any sort of advocacy tool that you might be using today. And then that's still organic. That's still really geared towards improving your brand's presence and awareness of your brand, building trust and all sorts of things. You're really not actively selling anything in that case, but I guess what if that's your ultimate goal, right? What if you are ultimately there to sell and you want to kind of be more aggressive? And I think this specifically applies to perhaps even certain types of businesses, whether it's real estate or whether it's insurance brokers or anybody where they have teams of people ultimately responsible for selling products. The mechanics would be similar to that of advocacy, whereby you are indeed allowing your employees to share content, but the purpose is perhaps more direct. With advocacy out of the box, you are simply asking employees to kind of reshare and just, amplify. In the case of social selling, your employees are indeed pushing a product and try to sell it actively.
Makes sense. A lot of the brand trust building with advocacy, like you're saying, amplifying messaging, whereas really more specifically, there is a goal with social selling, which is generate leads, get sales. I like the example of maybe a real estate agency, right? I think, the Remaxes or different brokerages of the world, they've got dozens, if not hundreds of agents, and being able to take maybe listings that maybe aren't their own, right? Could be listings from the team, from the area, be able to disseminate that from the top down, like, hey, here are new listings, and have those be able to get published without having too much extra thought, I guess plays into that social selling, would you say?
Absolutely. So I think with respect to the sales strategy for, let's say, a real estate company, I don't think they are, in some cases, the brand will be fairly known. We drive around neighborhoods, right? We see Remax, Keller Williams, we are very familiar with those names. So they are not necessarily, so these companies, they may not be as interested in the advocacy as it relates to brand awareness or amplification on some sort of company messaging, but they are very interested in making sure that their listings are out there present, and the brokers and agents oftentimes are running around doing showings and they're not out there necessarily paying as much attention to social, right? So, but nevertheless, it's a similar dynamic where the company's goal is to make sure that those listings are seen by people, but at the same time, and they are viewing real estate sort of brokers and agents as channels, essentially, not just sort of the corporate Twitter or Facebook or, a LinkedIn profile, but also their agents, right? So how do you, without relying necessarily on agents and brokers, right? Or not, maybe not, it's not even a question of reliance. Perhaps it's a question of sort of not forcing them to spend time on this. Otherwise, I guess an agent might have to hire like a social media manager to make sure that all the listings are flowing. So it's execution of that strategy, sort of top down, even perhaps finding ways to automate it fully with the goal of delivering, in this case, listings and other social selling, situations, could be products, all the way down to the specific employee, or again, in this case, like a real estate agent, to their social profile, with or without their involvement, right? So again, you can see, right, that it's a very similar dynamic to that of advocacy. A company, a piece of content gets delivered to a social profile of an employee. Again, with the difference being, perhaps, again, I'm probably repeating myself, that the advocacy is really geared more towards amplification of message. And while social selling is also amplifying the message, it's amplifying a very particular message, which has to do with selling, right, of a product.
Fair. So I guess when we look at industries, let's say, that are more compliance driven, maybe mortgage or insurance, where there's very clear guidelines of what you're not allowed to say, what you can say. I think I've had some conversations in the past with people in that industry and their hesitation around just posting on social because of just all the regulations around it. It seems like maybe then combination of the social selling, right? Just the advocacy, a platform to help these organizations to pass information down, social posts, templates, whatever, down to the employees so they can feel a little bit safer. Say, hey, I do want to post on my socials. I'm afraid to, I don't know what I can say. This stuff's already been kind of curated by the organization. Maybe there's an internal compliance team that's already, given it a pass through and says like, this messaging is good, right? Maybe at that point, just a matter of changing the tone so it sounds a little bit more like me, maybe not so corporate-y.
AI to the rescue. You're absolutely right. The compliance is a huge factor in certain industries. It's a do or die element, right, of marketing. And without a doubt, a company would be a lot safer, right, if they did have more control over the messaging of what the social selling or advocacy is kind of producing. And while you do want to give your employees some amount of freedom to kind of design the message in a particular way, I don't know, like if you have two agents, one is in New York City, right, and the other one is in rural Oklahoma, chances are you'll use different kind of messaging for both of them and around how you promote listings. But at the same time, it's still up to both the employee, the real estate agent in this particular case, and the company to kind of determine the exact nuances of that process. Compliance aside, are there differences like on a state-to-state level and whatnot? But I guess any decent tool that sort of delivers advocacy functionality to you should have a way for you to define your compliance strategies or to control what specifically employees can change around your message. And so that would be kind of the nice safety checks, right? But compliance is a factor in a lot of industries for sure that are selling products.
So in the case where, let's say, the employee, because that happens a lot in a lot of industries, if selling is the goal, right? Whether I'm a realtor, whether I'm an insurance agent, whatever, software sales, right? The goal is that I need to sell, and that social has been a strategy of mine. That more likely, I'm already active on social, right? So this is an added resource. The organization's helping me to provide more content so that maybe I don't have to think through it. At that point, would it make more sense for them to just have a social media scheduling tool versus an advocacy tool? How does that kind of play in?
Yeah, so I think the tools are here to certainly facilitate that, right? Without a tool, you'll end up with emailing your team, please share this onto social, right? So you would need to find a tool, and a nice social media management tool with ideally with an integrated advocacy where you can schedule something onto your social and have that be automatically made available within advocacy. That sort of is your ideal scenario. But that's not where the tools sort of end. Producing content, disseminating content. Remember that with social selling, there is a big need to attribute sales ultimately, right? So pretty much the only way to attribute sales will be through some sort of UTM tracking capability, whereby the posts as they get into each employee's social channels get properly tagged with UTMs. In this sense, so you would need a tool to do at least that, right? To make sure that each employee's sort of post gets a proper UTM, so subsequently you can attribute sales to those individuals. So without a doubt, I mean, in principle, certainly you can execute without a tool, but in reality, all these tools the price on these tools are almost inconsequential for what the objective is and what the value they deliver. So they are literally dirt cheap. Like if you really think about the sort of the ultimate goals here, right? So we're talking about like for a reasonable SMM tool, maybe a couple $100 a month, an advocacy add-on, probably another couple $100. And while you are selling listings where you make, thousands of dollars from each sale, it's the expense of the tool is just completely negligible.
Yeah, and I think it also goes into play that beyond just using a tool for that, right? Like you got to take into consideration the reach, right? The earned media value. And I know that's something that we've been talking about recently is how do we look at not just the reach when someone posts something that the organization's made available, but when they reshare an organization's post, when they like the organization's post, when they comment, right? All those sorts of engagement kind of plays into that. I know that we've been talking about that as we've been building advocacy. Like all of these are elements that go into helping an organization understand the earned media value of adopting, an advocacy platform or establishing advocacy as part of a rule within an organization. So let's talk maybe a little bit about what's earned media value. So how are we kind of playing into the calculation?
Yeah, so let's definitely define the earned media value, and it's a very simple idea to sort of understand. If you as a company have a certain spend to achieve a certain reach, and you can easily determine that number from either take your marketing spend or your paid marketing spend, and divide that by the number of page views or web traffic or whatever you view as your ultimate sort of reach metric. It could also be just social, like how many impressions or, what was the reach on your Twitter and whatnot. So you take that total of your reach, you divide that by the amount you spend, and you arrive at the earned media value. You know how much it takes you to reach 1,000 people, right?
Right.
Let's say it's $500 or it's $100, doesn't matter. And then you simply look at how much reach your advocacy delivered. And right away, you'll know how much you would have had to pay to achieve those results. So that's the earned media value. It's the kind of metric that accompanies any advocacy program. And it's such a simple indicator of the ROI, right? Is how much you are actually getting for it. And it's such an easy figure to sort of understand, unlike some other things in marketing where it's much tougher to determine the ROI. But yeah, so the earned media value is essentially the first sort of line of defense. It's the first metric that you would use to understand if your employee advocacy, aka social selling for some companies, is delivering.
Right.
And then couple that with attribution, which you can easily, set up by making sure that your content is UTM coded and you have a proper attribution tool. And we can provide a couple links to tools in the description. So earned media value plus the attribution tracking, and you have ultimately the answers, right, to the questions of what the program is delivering you, right? Easy to track, easy to adjust. You'll determine what kind of content is resonating better in your advocacy. You might find that, let's say, in the case of social selling, that certain types of products are not necessarily making it into the user feeds or certain types of messaging. Because mind you, not only will you be executing social selling in a way of, hey, every post is a selling item, every post is a listing or every post is a new product that you are selling. I think that would be probably a very crude way of doing of executing any marketing and social selling in particular. So I think this will be probably a combination of kind of items for sale coupled with informational content, useful content. So all of that will be flowing, right? And you will be able to kind of see all the way down to a specific piece of content as to not only how well it did once it got shared. Mind you, you also have to kind of penetrate this resistance with the employees because they are your natural kind of judges, right, of how good your content is. I mean, you may get all those smiles in a meeting room, right? And everybody's like, hey, we love this. But when it comes to sharing to their followers, like it would need to be at that right level, right? So it's like a good way of even doing some like A/B testing on what kind of content has a chance of surviving just by looking at how well it got picked up by your people, right?
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Definitely the smiles at the boardroom or the meeting. And then you see a post that had like one share out of a 50.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Right? Yeah, I mean, let's be frank, right? Even it happens with our advocacy program, right? Our team would put something together. It would get dozens of likes from internally, right? And there will be some content that doesn't get any, right? And that's, we don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but that certainly could be an indicator that that content is just not as interesting.
Yeah, especially if we have like a lot of internal team members that are part of an ICP, right? Or part of the demographics that an organization is trying to target. You get to really play around with that messaging internally too, right? Is it resonating with the team?
Right.
I did want to touch on the social selling aspect too, because I know we talked about real estate and brokers, and I mean, obviously there's a lot of organizations that social selling is at the forefront, but maybe there's some organizations who they're trying to do social selling at the organization level, meaning the company's LinkedIn account, the company's Facebook, but they haven't really considered or maybe a little bit afraid of empowering the employees, the sales team, to have their own social presence, to build their own personal brands. And I think what it kind of comes down to is if you're considering that, there's so much statistics, and I mean, maybe you should have brought some to today's episode, but that really helps you to define and understand that people want to engage with people, right? They follow people, they interact with people, not so much with brands. I mean, I follow brands like maybe Coca-Cola and, Airbnb, because Airbnb has really cool commercials that they put on their YouTube channel and stuff. But for the most part, organizations kind of need to understand that people want to follow and engage with humans.
Yeah.
And so empowering their employees, their sales team, their agents, whoever it is, to say, hey, listen, we need you to be active on social. This is part of getting you as a realtor, as an insurance broker, whatever it is, to develop your network, to build your audience, and empowering them to say, this is, not just the company selling, but you're on your court too.
Right. I think once upon a time, right, we lived in a world where companies' voice was that of the company. Meaning that if you wanted to read something by Coca-Cola, let's say, right, you would just sort of read their corporate, newsletter or something, or perhaps an update on their products. Subsequently, executive teams, right, started to kind of get involved, and you would read an interview by, leaders of the company, the SEO, so it's a pretty recent phenomenon where companies are okay with their employees freely sharing information about a company. Because obviously the reservation has always been that there is some risk to it, right? What if your employees misrepresent the product, or what if they kind of talk about it in a way that you prefer not to? But I think we've now arrived sort of at the time in this sort of evolution of social, where companies have accepted the fact that that is just inevitable. So you can't really stop or control the way people will express themselves about a product. And thought leadership, which is essentially building the profile of your, let's say, company leaders, has now kind of been made available to everybody in the corporate chain, right? So everybody all the way down to the lowest levels of the company hierarchy can have a blog. Like, a developer on our team could have a LinkedIn profile with very informational things related to his work at a company. Somebody on our QA team or somebody on our support team, everybody can have a voice, right? And as a matter of fact, they should have a voice. That's like a new mentality of what a company message is really all about. It's not just some top level, corporate message. It's the messaging all over throughout the hierarchy of the company, where people get to know about vistasocial. Let's say, I'm going to use our company as an example. They're going to learn from, let's say, Roman, a developer. They're going to learn from Vitaly, the head of product. They're going to learn from Reggie. They're going to learn from somebody on our marketing team. Just like you said, they're going to learn from us as people.
Right.
Then I just going to look at a post by Vistasocial as a company. And most likely when they hear that message from Reggie as a person, and that message doesn't look like a pre-made or cookie cutter corporate template, right? The type of connection Vistasocial could make with that individual through you is that much stronger, right? It is that much more valuable for us as a company, right? All of a sudden we get that trust factor, right? We get that interest factor. So I've sort of digressed a little bit in talking about like the thought leadership as it applies to all, kind of the entire corporate hierarchy. But I think kind of now going back to the social selling, you do want to empower your sales team and give them that freedom to be on social, right? I think they are perhaps a little resistance to the idea. They kind of want their Salesforce tools or whatever other CRM, but they also need to accept the fact that it's them being them on social, selling on your behalf or talking about the company on your behalf. All of that is really part of the strategy. So like anybody who is only looking at parts of this equation are really not sort of doing justice to what the potential out there and not even the potential, what's the reality, right, is. If you are on social media, you are public. Like everything you do, like your work, where you work, that's known. Your messaging, if it's about work, that's accepted, right? That's the world we are in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, the employees are on social already, right?
Yeah.
Why not empower them to say, listen, talk about the company, right? If you're in a sales team, if you're a realtor, whatever it is, like it's to your benefit.
It's to the benefit.
Empowering them. But I think it goes to the next level, which is how can we then give them resources? Because getting stuck on what to post and all that, and I think that's where a tool like this also comes into play. Having an advocacy social selling tool that helps disseminate some ideas of, hey, listen, this is something cool you should think about posting. And whether you post it as is or whether you tweak it to really make it your own, it's there as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of power in if the organization hasn't yet either adopted a tool or a framework to which to launch an advocacy or social selling play within their organization. I definitely urge them to look into some resources around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again, Vitaly. This is awesome. I love talking about advocacy because I am building kind of personal brand on LinkedIn. I know that you've been posting and getting active on social media as well. So make sure to follow Vitaly and I if you haven't already on our LinkedIn, and make sure to check out vistasocial.com/podcast to learn a little bit more about this social podcast. If you have some feedback, any ideas that you have for us on topics you'd like to see covered, make sure to check us out there. We'll see you next week.